And thanks everyone for taking the time out of their schedules to attend this webinar. The intent of this one is just to expose people and give you an overview of FlamMap 6 and some of its capabilities, and especially since we've added Farsight into it now. This wouldn't be possible for me to have this program and do this work and have this presentation without Mark Finney, who's the father of Farsight and FlamMap, Stu Britton, who's integral to me for helping writing code and getting code into the system, and then Rob Seeley, who helps with development and maintenance and additions to the help file that go along with the program. What I want to talk about today is quickly is a Farsight and FlamMap history, what's new, where to get it, some issues with landscape data sources, and then we'll kick into a demo where I'll do some examples of the capabilities and do some runs and show some of the outputs. Farsight is the original geospatial tool that Mark put together. You can see the timeline there. So it's been now almost over 20 years that Farsight's been around. The last formal version of Farsight that was released was back in 2008. It was taught at various levels in 493 when it was a standalone class as Farsight, and then taught in 495 for a while. In 2010, it was incorporated into the Wildland Fire Decision Support System, and people who use that system will know it as near-term fire behavior. And then in 2017, we've taken it out and put it back into FlamMap 6 and retired Farsight 4. So we're considering the official version of Farsight is now within FlamMap 6. FlamMap came along because Mark was looking for a quicker and faster way to look at evaluating fuels treatment, so in a faster way to do fuel fire spread modeling. And so that created FlamMap. He started out with the development of the minimum travel time algorithm to model fire spread, and then it's been around in various permutations. FlamMap 2 just had basic fire behavior, so just a spatial fire behavior. Think about it as spatial behave plus. In 2006, FlamMap 3 was released and came with the minimum travel time, so you could look at fire spread. And then that also included TOM, which is the treatment optimization model, as well as basic. In 2007, WFDS was starting to be developed, and we needed a way to test to do fire spread probability before WFDS formally existed. So we were doing all of that in FlamMap 4, which was never formally released to the public. 3 years later, we incorporated into WFDS as short-term fire behavior, so minimum travel time. And in 2012, FlamMap 5 was released, and that included Wind Ninja and spotting and landscape burn probability modeling. And then with the release in 2018 of FlamMap 6, we did Farsight. We included Farsight. We included some minimum GIS capabilities to where we have projection files for all your landscapes and input data like shape files for barriers and perimeters. We could do some projection and get everything lined up spatially. We included an editor. We included the ability to export out run logs from FlamMap, but also it's set up so that any landscape files and run logs from the Wildland Fire Decision Support System or from the Interagency Fuels Treatment Decision Support System, landscapes from there and data from there, along with run logs, could be imported into FlamMap to set up runs. So you could take work out of those two web-based applications and now mess with them and run them in FlamMap. And we taught FlamMap in the 495 class up until 2013, and then after that, 495 has pretty much been WFDS-centric and only teaching the applications that are available through WFDS. So in the Wildland Fire Decision Support System, basically it has FS Pro, which uses the minimum travel time algorithm that's used in FlamMap, and it has also basic short-term fire behavior and near-term fire behavior. So all of those, their genesis came from FlamMap or Farsight into WFDS. They were all developed and tested and initially done within FlamMap or Farsight and then ported into WFDS. The interagency fuel treatment decision support system right now only includes basic and the ability to use Wind Ninja. They are starting to test with landscape burn probability modeling. There are some people who have access to test it and run with it in IFTDIS, and they eventually want to include short-term fire behavior. So with that, that's why I kind of use this slide of saying that FlamMap is back to the future. FlamMap has never gone away. It's always been available and available for download, and people have continually used it, but when it lost its home in a red card course within the formal wildland fire training system, it lost a way to really communicate it to a broader user community. So I'm trying to get it back out there because it has its place for use as a means when you don't maybe have internet connectivity the way you need it, or you want to try to do something different than what you can do with WFDS or IFTDIS, like use custom landscapes that you've developed for your local area. Right now, WFDS doesn't, and I believe IFTDIS does not have the ability to upload a landscape into it that you've created from your local source data. You're tied pretty much to land fire data, and FlamMap gives you that flexibility. But that being said, FlamMap also will never be, at this point, probably an enterprise system with linkages to grab information and weather data and source data built into it. And it requires a higher level of sophistication or knowledge by the users who are going to use that model, because you have access to a lot more model settings. You can change things around, and you need to know what the implications of doing that are. So what's new in FlamMap 6? Well, there's a lot new, but the highlights are Farsight, really. We've included Farsight in FlamMap, which is analogous to near-term fire behavior and WFDS. The value added you get in FlamMap is we've embedded Wind Ninja into it, so you can use your weather information to develop gridded winds for use in any Farsight run in FlamMap 6. You can also use Wind Ninja and use the Wind Ninja program itself external to FlamMap and do gridded winds outside it, and then use those gridded wind outputs into Farsight. And the reason for that is that in Wind Ninja, Wind Ninja as we have it in FlamMap doesn't use the full mass and momentum solver. So in complex terrain, you may not be able to get all the physics into it. If you use external Wind Ninja, you can develop your gridded wind fields external to FlamMap, use the full mass and momentum solver to bring those files into FlamMap and use them. We've included an editor because from FlamMap 5 on, I wanted to have an editor in there, and we now have an editor in FlamMap that allows you to make global changes or use vector or raster maps to control how you edit the landscape, so you can do editing within FlamMap now of the landscape to account for changes. And as I said earlier, you can import run logs from WFDS, from any basic or short-term or near-term, but not FS Pro. And any spatial data from WFDS or IFTDIS landscapes you create in either one of those systems can be used. And I should update this, the IFTDIS run logs, like I mentioned a few slides earlier, can also be used within FlamMap to populate runs. Where to get it? If you basically go to www.firelab.org and then look for the fire behavior applications, and then look under the applications and look for FlamMap, you can get there. These are two direct links, one to go to the main FlamMap page and one to go directly to where the software can be downloaded. If I go to FlamMap, here's the main page, and it gives you some general information on the fire behavior, about what the system is, and just some general information. There's links at the bottom of it that take you to some background information and papers that you can use. Over on this side, if you were to scroll down, you'd see a box like this that says downloads and user guides to get the software, some FAQs, known bugs. Also is a way to do a new sign up. If you sign up for, well, it's just off the page, right down in here, there's for fire behavior. And when we do releases or make changes, we try to blast a note out through that mailing list. If you signed up for it, you'll get an email telling you that a new version is available or something has been fixed. And I also try to do that through the Lessons Learned Center as well. So if you click on it and you get to where the software is, the page will look like this, and this is a hot link that will download a zip file. And it's really important that you pay attention to this. FlamMap will only run in a 64-bit Microsoft Windows operating system. It won't run in Linux. It won't run on a Mac unless you're using some kind of emulator to emulate Windows, like Boot Camp or Parallels or VMware. We'll always have what the latest build date is there. And there's some important instructions here about what's in that zip file. There's the program installation file, some installation notes that you should read prior to installing the program, and release notes that summarize and describe all the elements in that release, and then some. This is what the release notes will look like. You notice it's 53 pages long. I try to go into detail about what's been added and how to navigate through those additions. There'll be a thing that has a summary of improvement and additions. So while I focused on the three big things that I'm going to talk about today, there was a lot of other things that were addressed or fixed within this release to address issues that have been found in FlamMap 5. Quickly, what I want to talk about now is data themes. Farsight, FS Pro, FlamMap, IFTDIS, WFDIS, they all use this basic grid sandwich of data that includes these 8 data themes: elevation, slope, aspect, fuel model, canopy cover, canopy height, crown base height, crown bulk density. If you're making your own themes at home and building your own, as long as you can provide an elevation, slope, aspect, fuel model, and canopy cover layer, you can run FlamMap and get surface fire behavior calculations. But if you want any kind of crown fire or spotting or crowning to be accounted for, you have to have these 3 other layers of canopy height, crown base height, crown bulk density. Fortunately, Landfire has provided a means to easily get this across boundary for CONUS, Hawaii, Alaska, and has alleviated a lot of the pain and suffering that used to have to occur if you were developing your own landscapes. But there's some issues, and I find that people don't really know a lot about this. Is that landscape data sources from Landfire. Landfire, you can get direct downloads. Woofdis has multiple Landfire versions available. IfyDish has Landfire version 1.4 only, or you can provide a local source. And I always tell people to include a projection file with your landscape. Make it the same name as your landscape file and include a projection file, no matter what source your data comes from. If you download landscapes from IfyDish, Woofdis, or Landfire, the landscape file will come with that projection file with it. But if you're building it on your own, in your local source, you need to make sure you have a projection file with it as well. By having that, it allows you to take advantage of some of the geospatial tools we've added, especially the ability to export all your run outputs and your landscapes out of FlamMap as KMZ files for use in Google Earth. If you don't have a projection file with it, we can't produce those KMZ files. So that's a selling point for having that just in itself. Another thing that I find that people don't know is that the Landfire data is projected in this NAT83 Albers. And there's some issues with that because Farsight, FlamMap, even Woofdis and IfyDish that are using these same geospatial modeling routines all require that your landscapes be oriented in a top north orientation. So something like a UTM, a local UTM coordinate, or state plane. And I find that people, when I talk to them about downloading Landfire data, they're not aware of this projection issue. And what it is that the native projection that the Landfire data is in comes in this Albers, Conus Albers, which is centered on down the center of the U.S. basically. As you move further out to the west and further out to the east, your landscapes will become tilted and not oriented top north up. Excuse me. What this means is that if you just download from a landscape file from Landfire and you're out here, and you don't have to be all the way in the west coast here. I was showing an example from right around here down in Montana, Idaho. Your landscape will be rotated up to 20 degrees. So that means if you input a wind speed of 270, your wind speed won't actually be operating like 270 in the landscape because your landscape will be rotated. So this is an example of that area, and this is downloaded, version 1.4 downloaded from Landfire in its native projection. And if you look at all these sections, which normally would run north-south, you can see they're oriented, twisted to the east, like here and here and here and here. But and this is what I was talking about. So if your landscape is rotating, you're putting in a wind direction, it's not going to give you fire behavior calculated correctly on that wind direction. Here's that same area and landscape reprojected to UTM NAT83 using the best fit option in Landfire, which now gives you a landscape that's rotated correctly so that wind directions will be used appropriately within the modeling. And if you want to know more about it, Landfire has, off their main page, they have an area on notes, and they have notifications, and this link here will take you to an article that was written in 2008 that talks about having the reprojector data to a local projection when you download it. And then there's several, they have several tutorials, like a YouTube video and this tutorial here, that walk you through the process of downloading data from Landfire and how to get it in a best fit UTM projection so you don't have to do it. The other thing is when you're downloading your data from Landfire, if you look, you can find, it'll construct a landscape for you. So you don't have to download the individual data themes and then create a landscape. You can download a landscape file already created with all the data layers and in the specific UTM coordinate system. And what I tell people is always go bigger than you think you need, because you can always make your landscape smaller after the fact. So landscape data projections, Woofus and IFTDIS have dealt with this by building custom projections, and every one based on the landscape extent that you draw when you're creating your landscape within them. FlamMap 6, because these are projected appropriately to be a north-top orientation, you don't have to reproject them. You can use them in FlamMap 6 with no other adjustment to those landscapes. One thing to be aware of is because these are custom projections and not standard projections that ArcMap knows, when you bring your outputs into ArcMap to use them, you may have to define the projection, even though you have a projection file with it when you're creating your GIS data themes from FlamMap outputs. But that's a whole nother lecture in and of itself. So with that, we're gonna kick out of the PowerPoint, and we're gonna kick into FlamMap itself. So I will start up FlamMap 6. I'm gonna open a run that a FlamMap project that I've kind of already put together. We'll talk about it. So this is a FlamMap project I put together just specifically for this presentation to go over stuff. I have a landscape already loaded. If I want to know something about this landscape, if I right-click here and go to Properties, I can see how many rows and columns of data it's in, what its general latitude is, what its distance units are in meters, what the source units are of every one of the themes that I'm using, and general information on cell size and stuff. And this is a landscape that I downloaded from Landfire. The one other thing that I want to talk about is the help system quickly. If you call or you have an issue with FlamMap, one of the first things we'll ask you is about FlamMap, because we want to know make sure that you have the most recent version and the build date. FlamMap has two ways to access the help. We have an embedded help file that's embedded within the FlamMap system itself, and it'll be a little bit behind because we only update it with the install file when we make major changes to it. But it has a whole set of information on how to, if you haven't used FlamMap or it's been a while, how to work through FlamMap, how to set up runs in FlamMap. We've created a whole set of tutorials that talk about loading landscape, using legends, controlling the display pane, how to do input or run, view outputs, how to deal with fuel moistures, how to run them. There's a sample data set that's included with the installation file. So if it's been a while since you looked at anything, there's a whole set of tutorials to work through. There's reference stuff which talks about almost anything that you want to know about FlamMap, like elevation theme, and they're hyperlinked to other places within the help file. There's something on fuel moisture files and all that kind of stuff. Run logs, and about Woofus input files and how to get them in. We also have an online help, and this is the one that we're keeping that will be the most up to date. Where you notice that the other one I had is version 69, we're at the version 71, and this has all the same information as the help file within FlamMap, but it's a little bit more up to date, and we're maintaining it and posting it up on this web page. So it'll always have the most recent information. FlamMap has, one of the things I tell people they need to do is look at their landscape and figure out what's out there on it. One way you can do that is just click anywhere on a landscape, and for that pixel, it will give you all the information on each of the data themes associated with that. But that's okay to cruise around and see what everything is. But really, we've included this feature called a landscape critique, and we offer two different versions of it. One is an HTML file. Just click on it, navigate to where you want it to go, and save it. So now it's saved on my hard drive, but it also just will open up in a browser for you. And it gives you a lot of information. It tells you a lot of the same information about cell size resolution, how many cells and that. It will tell you what the projection information is associated with that landscape file. It'll tell you what data themes are present, their units in the landscape file, and what the range of values are within there. It'll tell you for each data theme, it'll tell you a range of the min and max, the frequency, the percent, the overall percent. So you can get some quick looks at the data. This is looking at the topography data. Here's the fuels data, canopy, and all those data themes. Then it will also break it down by individual fuel models and tell you where that occurs across elevation, slope, and aspect, how it occurs with canopy cover and stand height, and all the other data themes. So each one of those. So here's fuel model 102, a grass model, and it's where it occurs across elevation, slope, aspect, and where it occurs with other things like canopy cover, stand height, canopy boat density. So it's a quick way to look at your landscape, but in a tabular data form. If you do it on the PDF, which will take a little bit longer to generate, it's bookmarked within it, but now you get some graphical data along with it. You can see in bar chart form how things occur, and it's basically just a repeat of the text, the previous one in text, but it's all done by, it gives you the distributions in a graphical form, so you can quickly scan through if that works for you. And clicking on any one of these is a bookmark to each of the individual fuel model data themes throughout it. So just two ways to really quickly look at your landscape and see what's in there. So with that, one of the things I was talking about that we've added is KMZ files. So if I take my landscape here, another way to look at it, you can see I can get to the properties, the critique of either one of those. I can create a landscape, or I can create this landscape KMZ. And I've already done that. It doesn't take long. I just have to tell it where to go. And there's the landscape. And if I double click on it, because I already had Google Earth open, it will show up. We defaulted to show you the fuel model. If I click in here, I can get some basic information again on what's in there. If I click on here, I can see all the base layers that were in that fuel model, in that landscape. If I highlight it, I can mess with the transparency and look at it in Google Earth. And of course, then I can do all the other stuff that I want to do. And I can look at any of the aspects, fuel model, canopy cover, any one of the data themes. So another easy way to look at your landscape. If you want to, right now we default to what this has a defaulted Lamfire, which is metric, but if you wanted your KMZ to be not in meters, but in feet, if you just come in and change it to here and say, okay, it'll change. You can change the units to what you want to be, what you want them to be. So canopy cover, it's going to be percent. Fuel models are classes because those are what they are. Aspect is going to be in degrees, and slope, it's in percent, but you can make it degrees if you want it to be. The key is that whatever you set these units to be, when you create the KMZ file for export, that's how it'll come out, is in those units. So put the fuel model back on, and I'm going to look at a Farsight run. So this is a Farsight run, and it's the one thing we've done if you're used to seeing working in FlamMap 5 is used to be you'd go to a run and you'd right click and you would pick just FlamMap. Well, we've broken it out because we treat Farsight as its own run tab window. If you're used to doing the old FlamMap, you know, this is where you would do basic fire behavior, minimum travel time, treatment optimization. And if you tell it to click a Farsight run, you get the dialog boxes for all the settings, and we have it broken up into weather inputs, model settings, and then the outputs that you want to have. And then if you were to do this import function here, allows you to import run logs from WFDIS or IFTDIS or from previously completed FlamMap runs, either basic, MTT, burn probability, or Farsight, and you can use the text files to fill in these dialog windows here for MTT runs or Farsight runs. You just have to have a landscape loaded, and then depending on which application, you have to provide a mission file or whatever. So on this Farsight run, I've already added a fuel moisture file. I can edit that fuel moisture file, and it has it by each fuel model and each size class, 1s, 10s, 100s, live herbaceous, and live woody. If I haven't created it yet, if I click on the plus, I can create a fuel moisture file that will, and then I can assign what I want those fuel moistures to be initially across all the fuel models, and then edit them by individual fuel model if I need to. You can also use custom fuel model files if you want. If you come into the winds, to the wind section, just like in an old Farsight run, I can use the weather stream to tell me what the wind speed and direction would be, or I can generate gridded wind from weather inputs. So here I would use my weather stream file to create hourly gridded winds based on Wind Ninja, but not the full mass momentum solver. And I'll come back and show that to you after we do this run. I can also use gridded winds from an atmosphere file. This is where I could use Wind Ninja external and use the full mass momentum solver in it to get the full physics and create an atmosphere file where I tell it which wind speed and directions I want to use for every hour within my simulation. And I can show you an example of that if we have time. We're could still use the old style weather and wind files with hourly wind data and once daily weather data. With the next release here in about another 6 months, we're going to make some changes and take this away and really want people to focus on using an hourly weather stream file. And there's a lot of advantage to that because now you can tell it exactly on the hour what temperature, RH, precip, wind speed, wind direction, and cloud cover could be. In the past, we could only give it a min and max for temperature and RH, and we would have to use sinusoidal curves to interpolate between those min and max hours to fill this in. But now you can provide it actually with hourly weather data. And you can get that from a raw station. You can get that from historical data out of using Fire Family Plus and generate a weather stream file that can be totally compatible and imported right into FlamMap. When I load the file, it'll tell me how much data I have available. And then I can see the file there. You can see that it's telling me that I have data available from the 4th of April to the 16th of April between the hours of midnight and 2300 or 11. And within Farsight, I can condition it however I want it to be. You really only need about 3 to 7 days of conditioning period with it. Tell people to try to have start your conditioning period because you're providing an initial fuel moistures here, to have it start from a date and time when those are representative of those fuel moistures. And I'm just going to leave it open. And then I'm going to say apply. If I come to model settings, I can provide it an ignition from a shapefile that I already have, or I can create a shapefile within the application and save it out. I can use barrier files, and these are shapefiles, and I can fill those barrier files. If you provide, like in this case, this river system here is a line shapefile. When we use it to create a barrier within the modeling application, it'll default to be the same width as the raster resolution of your landscape. So this landscape's 30 meters. So this landscape file would be, in the perimeter would be, along this line would be 30 meters wide. And then here's my ignition. Other things I have to set are what are the perimeter resolutions and the distance resolutions, and how often do I want to calculate fire behavior. I set the spotting probability. If I want to delay spots and let them sit there for a little bit before they come to life and start growing new fires. We've tried to eliminate creating lots of spots that are just sitting there and taking up computation time because they get overrun by the main fire front. And these are some default values. And the thing I want to point out too whenever you're in these dialog windows, if you click on the help, it'll take you right to that part in the help file and go into discussions. Oh, come on. Oh. Well, I don't know if it's because of my screen and how I have it truncated down. Yeah. So you can scroll down through here and it goes through every tab on there will have a discussion and links to more information about how you can learn about perimeter resolution and distance resolutions and what those settings mean in time steps, and everything is linked within there. So if you're on it, wherever you're at with the dialog box open, there should be a help button you can go to. You can set the foliar moisture content. You can pick between Finney's Crown Fire method or the Scott and Reinhardt method. And then I have to set the burn periods. In here, I have burn periods going starting on the 14th of April, start with the simulation starting at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and ending not at 2100, but at 2000. So in this case, whatever the end hour is, it'll burn up to that hour and then stop. And the thing is, it has to be somewhere between this date and time of information that I have. You can see this, I only have weather data between the 10th and the 16th between this time, and that's because I altered this, because I wanted to control when the pre-fire simulation conditioning period was and when the burn periods start. So in this case, it's going to condition from the fuels. It's going to take the initial fuel moistures that I apply here, and it's going to condition them based on the weather on between the 10th and up to the 14th of April at noon, and adjust those fuel moistures across this entire landscape before I even start the run. And that's a way to get the fuel moistures conditioned for slope and aspect and elevation by fuel models across this landscape. And typically 3 to 4 days is enough. You can go as far as a week, but 3 to 4 days is typically enough. You just have to be cognizant of whether you had major precipitation events within there that you need to account for and its effects on how wet or dry your fuels might be. And then every day and every burn period, it will continue to use the weather and adjust the fuel moistures throughout the simulation as it goes along. Outputs, there's a total slew of outputs that you can get. In this case, I'm just going to ask for flame length, rate of spread, the crown fire, perimeters, spot fire, location, spot fire list, and wind vectors. I'm going to say apply. And now I can launch Farsight, because if I haven't provided any one output, the launch Farsight button will be grayed out, and it will tell you what you're missing down here in the bottom. So I'm going to launch Farsight. So because I have a conditioning period, the first thing it has to do is it has to go through and condition all these fuel moistures before it runs. Now it's running the fire. And as it runs through here, you're seeing how many separate fires it's running, how many spot fires it's running, how many vertices it's running. It's giving you some information on the date and time and hour that your simulation is running for. The thing is, the higher the spotting you make it, the finer you make the perimeter and distance resolution settings and the model settings. The more days you run, the more hours you run, the longer it'll take to get an output and a simulation completed, and those are all decisions you got to make when you're setting it up for your particular circumstance. And because we're doing a webinar and I'm trying to display things, I've set up these runs to run fairly quickly so I can get outputs and we can talk about them. You can see right now it's at 1500 on the 16th, which is the last day that I had it going. You can see that it's had over 1800 spot fires that it's had to deal with or model. And everything started from this point right here. This was my mission right here for this simulation. So while that seemed like an eternity for me, while I was hoping it was going to run and not crash, it was really only a little over 2 minutes to get that simulation done. So now it's finished, and there's the simulation. Again, this was the ignition line I used. We'll zoom in a little bit here, because it's only doing simulations for the Farsight landscape that I created, for the run that I created, for the fire footprint. So here's the example of flame links for that run. And if I open up the properties, we have some predefined legends. In this case, it's based on hauling categories. So 0, 4 feet, 8 feet, 11 feet, 20 feet. Here's the frequency of those occurring. So a defaulted thing up for flame length. If I go to statistics, I can get some general statistics about the average flame length across the fire area footprint, what the maximum flame length was. If I come here to classes, I can get it by the same legend output. I can see the frequency, but I can also get the area. And I can get that in acres or hectares, and I can save that out as a CSV file that I could bring into Excel. I can also take flame length and save it as a ASCII file that I can bring into FlamMap later as an ASCII file and use it in ArcMap if I want. Rate of spread has all the same things. Farsight crown fire activity, if I open it up and say properties, gives me the class of crown fire, and we have some defaulted legends, but you can make them whatever you want them to be. So 1 is unburnable, 1 is surface fire, 2 or orange is passive crown fire, and 3 is active crown fire. And I can export these 3 out as ASCII files. If I look at this, I can see some pretty interesting behaviors here. Like it looks like there's some spot fires there that grew from spotting. And if I'll just change the properties on the spotting output. You can see those are all spot fire locations. We also have like this back buttons, so I can go to previous extents. So you can see here's all the spot fires. If I want to see a spot fire list, I can open that up and I can see the simulation launch time. It's X and Y, so where the spot originated from, where it landed, and its lat and longitude, how far it went, and how long it went, how long that ember was in flight. And then here is how far it went. So I can get that for every spot, every ember that was launched. I can take the spot fire locations, and because it's point data, vector data, I can save it out as a shape file. Perimeters, we have several ways of dealing with perimeters. The default display is to tell you to do it on the interval that you told it to calculate fire behavior. But if I come here to properties, I can change the visible perimeters by just the final perimeter. So there's the final fire perimeter for the simulation. I can tell it to use it by the burn period. So I had 3 burn periods. And I can also change the colors. So now I can see the 3 burn periods there. And if I want to, I can change it by some multiple or time step of the berm perimeters. So there's finer detail. And however I have that set up to display, I can export out of here as a shape file for use in GIS if I want it. We also give you a fire growth report that you can save out as a text file. So for each burn period, it tells you the time it ran, what the date and time was, how many fires it did, enclaves, or where it has to resolve issues where it's burned in on itself. Here's the total acres, and here's the time step acres. So the first hour that it ran, the time step and total acres are the same. But here, if I take the 174 plus the next hour's time step acres, there's the total acres. And I can get that for every hour out of it as a text file. And it's also you can come through, and so here's where I was outside the burn period, so that there was no fire growth. And every one of the 3 burn periods provides that information as a text file. And it's also in the perimeters and when I save it out as a shape file. So I said we ran Farsight, we use Wind Ninja in here. If I come to here, I can see all the arrows are the vectors of speed and direction that Wind Ninja produced for use in the simulation. You can see here that here's the range from 0 to 20 miles an hour as defined here. Created some defaulted legends, so I'm going to take that one and apply it. Say OK. And now if we zoom in, we can see the hodgepodge of Wind Ninja vectors, speed and direction. If I put the perimeters on there, we can see where they were used within each simulation period. So now I've got it overlaid on fuel models. So I said you could bring this all out as for use in a KMZ file. So if I do Farsight and I say KMZ output, and that'll take a little bit longer to create with all that information. And when you save a Farsight run or any of the fire behavior runs out as a KMZ, it also includes the landscape. So if you don't, the landscape file will come along with it as a KMZ file. So there's my Farsight run. It includes the Farsight arrival time in minutes, but if you zoom in, I can now do anything that I want to do in Google Earth, rotate it, zoom it out, zoom it in. If I click in here, I get information on the landscape file. If I click in here and click on the Farsight run, I can see all the information associated with that Farsight run, the landscape I used, settings associated with the model, what was used as ignition files, all the settings are included right there. Like I said, if I wanted to look at the landscape, the base landscape file is all included in here. If I want to show fuel model instead, I can have fuel model with an output underneath it. I'll turn off the ignitions, I'll turn off the barriers. If I come to the spot fire locations, you can see that they show up here as you zoom in further across there. If I want to show crown fire as the output with the perimeters on it, with the spots, there's all of that with the cell counts and everything. If again, all of these can be made translucent if you want, so you can see how they are underneath the landscape. So an easy way to look at it, share it, because it brings all the information that you want to share with anybody regarding that. So basically, that's not much has changed in the basic fire behavior setups or anything. All the same things can be done as far as outputs of getting things. It's not much different. You can use wind direction, you can use Wind Ninja options for basic runs or for minimum travel time. You can use gridded winds and Wind Ninja derived in there. If same thing with the MTT run, you know, from here I use wind speed and wind direction, but I can generate it using gridded wind or supply gridded wind files out of Wind Ninja external. It's a little easier for MTT and basic because the conditions are held constant. For Farsight, it's a little bit more difficult. There's just more settings to deal with. If I do Wind Ninja options, because it's such a memory intensive thing, we try to give you a warning of how many cells you'll create at different raster resolutions and recommend a raster resolution, because you can run out of memory in your computer when you're trying to calculate that. We've also have made it that if you set these to 0, it's going to look at every one of my hourly weather entries here for which I want to do it. It's going to say generate a Wind Ninja run for every one of those wind speeds and directions. If I use this, I can limit the number of runs. So I can say if it's plus or minus 5 miles per hour and it's plus or minus some wind direction tolerance of 10 degrees, don't do another one. It's good enough. Use the previous one you already had. So there's lots of ways to generate that. If I say apply and then launch, previously the run I did, it just created the wind vectors based on the hourly wind speed and direction data that was in there. Now we're going to use a Wind Ninja run to do that. And it will take longer because it's got to go through all the conditioning first, and then it's got to calculate all the Wind Ninja run and directions, and before it goes forward. So there's a lot that you could do. We could spend a week's worth of webinars and just focus on each one individual part or portion of it. If you're going to download it and use it on your own, I highly recommend going through the tutorials, because we've tried to go through tutorials, set up tutorials that are realistic, but give you results in a quick fashion so that you can learn to work through the process and work through the program itself and learn the program and all its functionality and applications. And I know we're on the hour here, and after this run finishes, we should probably open it up for questions. So here's that run, and it's a little bit different than the previous run. You can see the black parameters are the previous run we did where I used the straight wind directions, and now the red is from the most recent run we did using the Wind Ninja. So it's changed it a little bit. In accounting also with the differences of spotting that would have occurred. But look at, some of those went to 40 miles an hour now. So now you can see where those wind vectors are similar, and you can also save that out as a shape file or as source grids, which will take all those gridded winds it created and create a TIFF file with all of them in it. GeoTIFF, multiband GeoTIFF. And I guess with that, Signe, we should probably kick to questions a little bit if people have questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck, for the really informative presentation. We have a few questions ready right now, so I'll go ahead and get going with those in a minute. For those of you that need to leave, please feel free to type a question and we will still answer it, and you can listen later on the recording of this webinar, which will be posted on our website within the next day or two. And also as a reminder, when you leave the webinar, there will be a brief survey, and we would really appreciate your feedback on that. Chuck is interested in a few of the questions, and we also like to hear from you on potential future webinar topics. So we'll go ahead and get going with questions. Our first question is pretty broad. curious if we're able to download the software ourselves, or is it going to be through the help desk ticket? So I'm assuming a federal agency help desk. Do you have an answer to that, Chuck?
Well, I can tell you that if you go to firelab.org and you come here and you go to FlamMap, you come down to software, that you can download the software from here. Anybody should, in the agency, I'll say that any federal agency should be able to download the zip file. There's information about how to install it here. What I found is if you work for Department of Interior, you may have, especially the BIA, you're probably going to have to deal with your own IT people to give you permissions to be able to install it. Just seems like that's the way it is. Everybody's federal agency security policies and procedures might be a little different. So in theory, you should be able to, but depending on the agency you work for, you may not be able to install it.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. The next question has to do with bringing GPS data into FlamMap. If the program is running in NAT83 and the GPS is running in WGS84, will that move a point of origin when it's converted, and how can we keep that from happening?
So if you bring in your GPS in WGS84, we've incorporated some GIS capabilities that as long as your landscape file has a projection information, it'll shift and put those positions correctly within FlamMap, as long as both pieces of information have projection files. That being said, I'm from the era of ArcView where everything had to be in the same projection, so I would say you're better off, you'd be better to reproject your GPS stuff into the same projection as your landscape file and then use that within FlamMap. But in theory, we have accommodated the ability to project stuff, but on the fly and put it spatially within the program. Now, any runs you do won't be in your WGS84 GPS. It'll be in the same projection output as the base landscape file. So you'll have to deal with that. So there's two answers to that question. Yes, you can bring it in, and it should get put in the right spot on the landscape, but I always like to have everything in the same.
Okay, thank you. And this next question is fairly specific. If the weather stream is based on historic RAWS data, for example, May 4th through May 9th, but I want to do a Farsight run for May 10th in the next operational period, there's no historic weather for a day that has not yet occurred. How can a person approach this?
So you would have to, so there's two things. I'm working on that to try to get the ability to get data from Matt Jolly. I'm working with Matt Jolly here at the lab, and we're trying to rectify that to where you can get a weather stream file by clicking on a point and get previous days plus forecasted data out for some period, 3 to 7 days. In lieu of that, what you'll have to do is go to the point forecast matrix for the Weather Service office, click on a point, and be able to get the data out this way, and you can get surface wind speed and wind direction, and you can get it out for a period of time. And so you can get forecasted data from the Weather Service. You'll have to create that file here. Based on that, you can export. It's pretty convoluted. You have to come out and get it into an Excel spreadsheet or type it into a text file that FlamMap understands. During fire season, I have a way to work with weather service offices to where we can currently get a forecasted weather stream out for a period of time, but it's because they have to go in and do it manually. They have to interact with it. I try to restrain that till fire season and it's actually being used on a fire. Otherwise, you'll have to use the weather service data to create your own spreadsheets and get data out. So like here, I picked a point and I restricted it to surface wind, dates, RH, and then I copied and pasted that into an Excel spreadsheet, which then I created the format that I needed: the year, the day, the month, the hour, temp, RH, precip, wind speed, direction, and cloud cover, and put that into a weather stream file to do it. It's the only way I can do it right now. And every time I do user surveys, people ask me, why can't you automate the weather and include links? And technically it's not a problem, but for me, developing a standalone desktop application, as soon as I put live links out to other websites to grab weather data or landscape data and get auto downloads of stuff and incorporating, FlamMap would be dead because I would never be able to get through the CIO and all the security stuff I would have to do. I could never get it. So while I understand people want that, and technically it's doable, I just can't do it and keep the application as a standalone desktop application.
All right. Next, I'll just share a comment with you that participant worked through the tutorials and they are very good, so encourage others to do so. And then another question, how do you define the ignition area, and can you define multiple ignition areas?
Okay. Yes, you can. Let's do this. So we're going to work on this new Farsight run. So up here, we have a way to do point ignitions. So I could do a point ignition. I could do point ignitions across here. I could do, the thing is I can't mix ignition types. They can be points, lines, or polygons. You can also, so that I could come here and do a line file if I wanted to. Or I could do a polygon. And these I could be that I drew in on my own like this. Once I did a polygon, let's say I do options, shape, save to file. And I would say example polygon. But I could also use like a perimeter. So here's a perimeter from an IR perimeter from a fire that I could use from a previous day as an ignition. So I can bring in previous ignitions from IR flights and use that. I don't have to turn this into non-burnable because we say if you give us a polygon ignition like this, that we're going to burn it outward. So as long as this is really a closed polygon, it's going to burn outward from this in that way. So there's lots of ways to get perimeter ignition files in. You can put them in yourself, or you can import perimeters from previous days run on a fire, for example.
Great, thanks, Chuck. There's one more question. If anyone else has a question, please type it now at this time so we can get it answered. You mentioned computer memory limitations. Are there any desktop or computer hardware recommendations or limitations to consider? And as this participant recalls, Farsight was originally optimized for hyperthreading.
Yeah, so the way we have it running right now, like I'm running this on what the Forest Service would call as a mobile workstation, a GIS laptop. And this is a pretty old one. So I have 16 gigs of RAM, and for most of the stuff I'm doing, I'm pegging the meter. I'm using about half of that for Farsight. I try to have everything else closed. I don't like to have ArcMap open generally when I'm running things. Definitely no Outlook or mail system stuff going. I try to limit what's being used. You can see this is a pretty old processor compared to what you can get now. I would say if you can get your laptops up to 16 gigs of memory, that's a pretty good place to go from. Hard drive space is another thing to think about. You can see that if you're doing, all these runs and creating all these outputs, and you're doing it multiple times, you can create a lot of output files. So having like a pretty good 250 gigs of hard drive space or an external drive to write from or write to save your stuff is good. That adds some time though, having external drives, but that's one way to get around those limitations.
Okay, thanks, Chuck. I don't see any more questions, so we'll go ahead and close this out.